Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I am Lisa. You don't have to go with all the names, just call me Lisa. I'm here to help you understand a little bit more about what's going on from the Chinese games industry perspective of growing internationally. And I think since we're sitting here at the US-China Institute, many of you are probably well-versed in the geopolitics and the goings-on that goes back and forth between the US and China, but China also relates to other countries around the world, not just the US. It's important to take some recognition of some of the good things as well as some of the tricky parts. And I think that we can look through the lens of the games industry to do that. Either you have some understanding or appreciation for China, or you might have some understanding and appreciation for the games industry, but it looks to me like a lot of you are students, but I would like to see a show of hands. Who is a student here? Okay, and who is a member of the community, not related to the school? And how about anybody who is kind of on faculty or working with the school, but not a student? Well, great. You're all welcome to come introduce yourself to me afterwards. I'd love to talk to each and every one of you. And my email address is lisa@nikopartners.com. You can send me a note anytime you want, and I will respond eventually. So let's see. I am honored to be back for my second presentation here at the US-China Institute. The first one was before the pandemic, and a lot has changed in the world, obviously, and a lot has changed with China. And I just want you to, you're probably wondering, why would you listen to me about this topic? And while Clay was nice, Mr. Professor Doobie was nice enough to introduce me to say that my firm has been around for a couple of decades, which it has, I think perhaps we should, I should tell you that one of the reasons to listen to me is not only am I the CEO and the founder of this company, but for 20 odd years, I have been covering the markets in the games industry exclusively in China and throughout Asia and more recently the Middle East. And I have a team of about 25 people who work for Niko Partners. They are located around the world. We had no problem slipping into the idea of remote work because we always have been remote work. And it's we follow the sun, meaning somebody's always working on some of our research projects wherever they're awake around the world. And I got into this because I was always fascinated with international economic policy, international business, and most importantly, my personal motto is peace through intercultural understanding. And I really feel like that can kind of resonate with people in a variety of ways. For me, what that means is if we all get to know each other a little bit better, and I can tell you some of my policy suggestions for Congress, but I think that if we all got to know each other a little bit better and do study abroad programs and different things around the world, we would all come back as ambassadors for the whole world. And the video game industry does this every single day. Gamers are playing the same games on the same servers a lot of times with people with multiple backgrounds, multiple languages. And when we get to be in competitive gaming with esports, it really is like any other sport. And the beauty of sports is that it can truly be an international unifier. And so I like the fact that every single day of my life, I can wake up and practice what I studied in school and also practice my motto. And I would encourage all the students in the room to kind of find their passion because it's a long life of working every single day, all day long. And you might as well really enjoy and be passionate about what it is that you do. And you're just going to fall upon it. I did not graduate college and say, I'm going to start Niko Partners. It just sort of happens over time. So be open to ideas, read the signals, and again, if you want to email me even about your approach to what you're studying and what you might do afterwards, I'd be happy to give you some advice for what it's worth. All right, let's get into it then. The global games market is worth $175.7 billion. As was alluded to earlier, this is larger than music, movies, and television combined. All three of those combined are not the same size as the games industry. And it is a fantastic medium, and it's got a lot of different facets to it: art, marketing, development, coding, distribution, streaming, so many different things. There are 3 billion gamers worldwide as well. That is a very large portion of the global population. And through all this, one country has stood above the rest over the last 20 years, which is China. So the Chinese games market is the largest in the world, the largest single domestic market. I say domestic because throughout this presentation, I will be talking about how there is the domestic revenue generated by Chinese gamers located in mainland China, and then there's international revenue generated by Chinese game companies outside of China. So as we listen to these words that I'm going to be saying today, keep that in mind. Over on the right side of my chart here, you can see that these are the ratios of the global revenue that is held in domestic or inside China. So the domestic Chinese revenue ratio of the total worldwide market. And you can see my color code. So 32% of mobile games revenue globally is generated in China. That's the easier way to say it. And 37% of PC revenue and only 3% of consoles. Now, there were 14 years of a console ban in China, and it's only very recently that Chinese consumers have started to embrace console gaming. And for many Chinese buyers, consoles are too expensive. But the more important reason why there's fewer revenue from games is because there are fewer console games that are approved for the Chinese market. And so there are not as many games to earn money off of. This revenue here does not include the hardware. This is just the games themselves. All right. It hasn't always been that the Chinese market has been, worth $45 billion, though. In the 2000s, you could say that the Chinese market was just an insourcing market, meaning global video game companies would have studios in China to have lower cost labor and train these developers to help them with art styles or QA or other features of a development environment. And over time, those workers built a lot of skills and got kind of antsy. So they went out and started building outsourcing studios where they would commission their own labor to help companies of all sorts around the world. And pretty soon they got really good and they started building their own game development studios. And now here we are. Much of this revenue is generated by Chinese developed games in China. And I have to say that Niko Partners is like 21 years old, and Tencent, which is the world's largest games company, is younger than we are. Now, it makes me a little bit ashamed that they have like a gajillion people working for them and they generate a lot of revenue around the world. But I can say that we've been in the games industry in China longer than Tencent has. That's my claim to fame. So Tencent and NetEase are the 2 biggest companies in China in the games industry, and Tencent is also the largest games the largest games company in the world. They have a combined 61% share of the PC and mobile games market in China. There are other companies that are really good and big and rising too. You can see them here on the left side. MiHoYo is one of them. Genshin Impact is a super popular game everywhere. And then they also have a lot of overseas revenue. So I told you before that we'd be talking about the domestic revenue, which is generated in China. Those are the figures on the left side. And then outside of China are the figures on the right. So you can see that, interestingly, MiHoYo has more overseas revenue than NetEase does, and also more overseas revenue than domestic revenue. So they are doing something right. One could argue that what they do well is that their game style is more of an anime style, and anime is adopted all over the place. Japan, of course, and the Middle East, where I just was recently, they also are very keen on anime, as are a lot of folks here in the United States. So if we look at this, we can see that of the top 10 games in 2022, as you'll see the source. Anybody here in school needs to know to source your data. That I'm just going to take a little aside and say there'll be no plagiarism. So you source your data always. So we source our own data for this kind of talk, and it's really important that if you get to see this slides later, you don't want to just claim that you made all these calculations on your own. So you should always be looking for where the source is. Some of the data in here is sourced outside of Niko Partners, but I just felt compelled, as a mom, to say to all the kids out there, be sure to source your data. Okay, so here we have the top 10 games in China last year by PC games by revenue. And Tencent has number 1, number 2, and number 3. Their number 1 game has generated $1.6 billion of revenue in mainland China alone. And then you can see number 2, number 3. Number 4 goes over to NetEase, which is Fantasy Westward Journey. Fantasy Westward Journey is about 20 years old also. This is a really old game. And it's still making a lot of money. Let's go to number 5 is Genshin Impact. Number 6 is Tianlang Babu, TLBB as we call it. And then we go back to Naraka Blade Point and then World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft is written there in a little bit of a grayed out format because NetEase does not have the World of Warcraft license any longer since January 2023. So this data is from 2022. When it was big, but it doesn't have it anymore. And we will see what happens with Blizzard's game coming in the future. Another interesting thing to note here is that PUBG is a huge game in China, number 10 PC game there. It's not even allowed. It's not even legally offered in China. It is available only via Steam and not via Steam China, just Steam International. Does anybody know has everyone heard of Steam? Let me know. Okay, for those of you who have not heard of Steam, Steam is a distribution platform primarily for PC games, and it's like the largest in the world. You could find, I don't know how many thousands of games on Steam. And Steam is available via VPN. Actually, you don't even need a VPN to access Steam in China, but you do need a VPN to play the games that are available via Steam in China if those games are not legally available in China. And I will be getting a little more into that throughout this talk. So PUBG, though, the important part is that it's not even legally available in China and it's still a top 10 game. And I should say also that these top 10 games make up, I think it's 45% or 48%, something like that, of the total revenue of all PC games. So it's a lot lies in the balance, so you have to make your games excellent. Another way to look at Tencent and NetEase is by their global rankings. So Tencent has 5 games in the top 10 games worldwide on the iOS charts by revenue, 4 by downloads, and NetEase has 2 in the top 10 worldwide and 1 by downloads. And Tencent also has, as I've been saying in presentations such as this for many years, I believe they are on a quest for global silent domination, meaning that they go out and invest and buy and do M&A with all kinds of companies. They're up to more than 200 investments in games companies so far. Some are outright purchases, some are a little bit less, but yet they don't put their brand on anything. And so it's interesting to watch this company slowly take over the world. They're already the largest games company in the world, and then they're investing in all these other companies in the world. And it's fascinating to see they never put the Tencent label on it. They both have a goal, by the way, of achieving 50% of their revenue overseas, meaning outside of China, in the near term. So they're working hard to do this. One way they're doing this is to establish international publishing brands outside of China. Why would they do that? Has anybody thought about geopolitical issues? Chinese companies need to be super careful if they want to have global audiences and global partners. So one thing they're doing is establishing these publishing businesses and incorporating them outside of China, having their servers be outside of China, and behaving like they're not Chinese companies. So Tencent has Level Infinite, which is fairly new and is big in North America and other Western Europe. MiHoYo has the HoYoverse, ByteDance has Newverse, Lilith has Farlight, and NetEase has Exceptional Global. Exceptional Global is still kind of under the radar. I wasn't really familiar with this myself until recently, but these companies are all setting up publishing arms outside of China so that they can have more either like a listening post, as it were, around the world, and to be able to make partnerships with global companies and publish games in other countries, even if there are geopolitical issues at hand. They are also expanding via development studios. So some of those investments are in development studios, and they're also setting up their own studios, 100% owned studios around the world. These are just since 2022, the number of studios that have been invested or purchased outright by these two companies. The expansion is just really so quick, it's hard to even keep track of it all. But why do they want to go global? Well, there are a lot of roadblocks to continuing growth in China's domestic market for Chinese companies. And so these companies, which are often publicly traded, they have to be responsible to their shareholders. They also have to be responsible to their gamers to develop new games or offer more games. And they also have to think about some of the domestic hurdles to success. So there is a slowdown of the domestic market. This was partially due to this zero COVID policy and partially due to the economic law of large numbers, which is how much bigger can you possibly grow when most of the people in China are already playing these games. What's going to happen to make them continue to spend more and more? You're having, like I said, $45 billion in revenue in a year, so maybe we get to $50 billion. That's not a very high growth rate, but we're talking about the additional $5 billion, right? So that's a lot of money, and the money already exists there. But they want to still keep growing, so they need to grow somewhere else. Zero COVID policy really threw the world for a loop, as I don't have to tell anybody in this room, but it also kind of hampered the games industry in China, especially for esports and some other, most particularly for ad-based games, because the advertising revenue just completely fell out when people were not, spending a lot of money on consumer products and things like that. I've mentioned the word geopolitical risk, and there's also been a lack of games licenses for imported games, which makes it difficult for the Chinese game companies to have a hit title with a foreign IP. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more because it's kind of complicated if you don't really follow the idea of what's going on with games licensing in China. And then there was the Blizzard shutdown, and then most importantly recently, maybe not most importantly, but most intriguing to me, is that there was a regulatory limitation on youth under the age of 18 in September of 2021, which limited them to playing 3 hours of games a week, online games. There could be no regulation of games played offline, but online games could only be played 3 hours a week, 1 hour on Friday night, 1 hour on Saturday, and 1 hour on Sunday, all from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., which really hurt some of the little kids, can't stay up that late. So their audience is kind of dwindling. So these companies are looking overseas to kind of find some path ahead. This is sort of an extension of what I just said. There were games licenses by the NPPA. The NPPA is the National Press and Publications Administration. Every single game published in China has to get a license, an ISBN. It's sort of like the book number that you have on every library book or anything that gets published in America. You have to do that for every single game in China. There has to be several licenses, an internet license, and all kinds of different rigmarole that I won't get into, but one of the things is an ISBN that's granted by the NPPA. These are hard to come by, and I'm going to show you some data on how this is hard to come by. The children's gaming time limit is what I just talked about, and soon there will be more regulations. Mobile apps are going to need to be licensed, and then generative AI apps also. And AI is going to be kind of like a game changer for everyone, everywhere, for all sorts of things, and games are a very logical place for AI to take place as well. Okay, I mentioned about the youth gamers. and the regulation. After the September 2021 regulation went into place, my company put together a report that was published in July 2022 about the impact of those regulations, because we wanted to see, was our forecast model just completely blown out of the water because of a regulatory policy that nobody really expected? So what happened was, in fact, we lost a lot of youth gamers, a lot. They all kind of adhered to the rules. And then our forecast period doesn't even get us back to the level of 2020, which was before the rule went into effect. We did a survey of students, of their parents, of people ages 17 and 18 directly, of teachers, and I don't know, a lot of people we talked to. And we came up with a whole host of stuff that we published in a report called Chinese Youth Gamers. And we have another one this year called Japan Youth Gamers. And there wasn't any kind of roadblock policy that happened in Japan, but the China one was really interesting. So we decided to look at the Japanese youth gamers as well. Okay, so you can see that 77% of the people said that they play fewer hours per week as a result of those policies. And that there are, it was essentially all the data there says is it was a big impact. It's not necessarily a blow to revenue in China because this age group made up less than 5% of the total games revenue the year before. So we didn't lose a lot of revenue by limiting what they can play. But what we did lose is the future esports athletes. In order to play esports, you have to have a lot of time spent. And these kids are now finding other things to do with their time. And so we see the popularity of esports over streaming and viewership and so forth. And maybe they will resume playing when they go to college or university or when they're an adult. And odds are they will. But for the strong set of competitive gaming, we think there might be a problem in the future with this policy impacting esports in China. On the other hand, esports is really hot in China, so I'm not sure, what exactly will happen, but this is notable that we are losing a section of gamers there because they'll just get older and then they might not play as much and then the younger people will play even less and so on and so forth. It could be a problem. This talks about the games licensing that I said from the NPPA. In 2020, there were 1,314 local games, meaning developed in China, that received a license, and 97 imported games. I mean, I don't even know the number of games that are published on the App Store every day here, but it's way more than that. And in 2021, it went down a lot, 679, and then 76 imported or foreign games. Then there was a ban, a 9-month ban of licenses for everybody as they kind of reshuffled some of the regulatory bodies in China. And so that's one of the reasons the 2021 numbers is smaller, because their period was curtailed. In 2022, in April, there was a restart to the licensing, and then you could see that we had, in 2022, 468 domestic games and only 44 foreign games approved in the year. And then in 2023, until July, there were 600 domestic games, which is more than 2022, and 27 import games, which is less than 2022. So we are hopeful that there'll be more batches of games approved. If this trend continues, and if the geopolitical situation continues to be challenging, and if there are more conflicts for game companies who lose their licenses or something like that, it doesn't bode well for the global development in China, which is why these Chinese companies are looking outward and trying to be ambassadors of their own country to the rest of the world with their own games that they're developing. So these are some of the reasons. You can see here that globally, Honor of Kings is the #1 game, and it's only played in China. Outside China, it's called Arena of Valor, and it doesn't have as much traction as Arena of Valor. But in China, it's still the #1 game globally because of the amount of playing that's done in China. Peacekeeper Elite is also called Game for Peace, And Genshin Impact is the popular game from MiHoYo. Now, Niko Partners has a China games and streaming tracker, and we track the games that are streamed on Douyu, Huya, and Bilibili. We update it every 24 hours. We have about more than 740 games, I think, that we track, 140,000 streamers. We rank them on 6 different metrics, including one called the Niko Index, which is our approximation of the number of viewers. It shows a relative kind of popularity index. And so here we can see that Honor of Kings is the most popular game. And then League of Legends is also a top game, and then Genshin Impact. And there are, obviously, if I said 740, then that leaves us 737 other games that are also ranked. And then you can see this is a sort of a tally of the number of imported game licenses over the years. It's like disheartening to see this small of numbers of the games when there's so many excellent games around the world, but they're not allowed, which is why it's interesting that Steam is still available in China, because a lot of the foreign games that are not granted licenses are available for gameplay in China over Steam International. And another way that you can have your game be live in China without a license is to have it be an ad-only revenue game. So something that doesn't require in-app purchases is also not yet subject to the licensing process. This is more just kind of like the foreign games, or the games that are popular overseas from some of the Chinese companies. And what's notable is that PUBG and Call of Duty are both foreign IPs. So they're really popular in China and they're popular outside of China, but they are foreign IP. And so it doesn't seem, it does seem to reason that the Chinese gamers also want foreign IP games. And it's important to note that the global developers still want to partner with Chinese companies despite the potential decline in that market, because number one, it's still rising. It's just not rising as quickly as it used to. Number two, it gives them access to China, which is still, as I opened this talk by saying, the largest games market in the world. And Chinese game publishers and operators have tremendous skill at very large scale live ops. Unlike anywhere else in the world, they've really mastered that. So this is a skill that is desired for partnership by some of the foreign companies. And they also have incredible mastery of what's popular in a mobile game. So these are some of the key reasons why companies still want to partner with Chinese companies. Foreign companies want to partner with Chinese companies. All right, so taking a look outside of China, I mentioned some of the worldwide stuff, and that includes a lot of Western markets, but we at Niko Partners, we cover India, 6 countries of Southeast Asia, Japan, South Korea, Chinese Taipei, as we call it, and 3 countries in the Middle East, and then we're looking at other kind of emerging markets. Our methodology is we do what's called local expertise with global perspective. Our methodology is kind of bottoms up, which means we look at all the detail, we combine it all together, and then we kind of build our market models upward instead of taking a total revenue value for the world and then slicing it into countries. We go the opposite direction. So we have a lot of information about what works for localization, what works for just the way the gamers think, the gamer behavior, the spending, all the roadblocks, all kinds of stuff. And that's how we do our research. So looking at India, there's a big demand, I should say, for Chinese games in India, but there's also a geopolitical problem. So India blocked Chinese games that were on servers in China going to Indian gamers. And then one is called Battlegrounds Mobile, which was PUBG Mobile for India. And now it has resumed, but it was the largest game in India. It probably will return to be. And Free Fire is a game by Garena, which is another company heavily invested by Tencent. Their servers were not located in India either. So now, but they will also be resuming play in India soon. In Southeast Asia, there's a game called MLBB that's super huge, Mobile Legends Bang Bang. And it's the #1 game by revenue in SEA, but it's a Chinese-made game, but it's not even available in China. It will soon launch in China, but it has not yet. And then 6 of the top 10 highest grossing games in 2022 were from Chinese developers. And there are a lot of companies from China that are establishing regional offices in Southeast Asia, especially in Singapore. Part of that is to be able to say, hey, look, we are not a Chinese company. And part of that is to be able to take advantage of the hub in Southeast Asia for a lot of other markets in the region. The Middle East is so fascinating to me right now. So I mentioned before, and I think that was also mentioned in my introduction, that I recently went to the Middle East. I was a speaker at something called the Next World Forum, which was put on by the Saudi Esports Federation. And it was in Riyadh, and it had a lot of amazing people attending it. And my speech there was about the growth of the Middle East games market, Middle East, North Africa, the MENA games market. And in that, I drew a lot of compare and contrast about the evolution through my eyes of the Chinese market over the 20 years that I've tracked that market to what is my observation of what's going on in the Middle East. There are a lot of similarities. So I drew a lot of comparison for the Saudi attendees to what I had seen in China and how I thought that this might go for the Middle East with the strong amount of government investment. The Saudi Public Investment Fund has pledged $38 billion in investment to build their games industry. That is more than any government ever in the history of the world has ever pledged to do. And they've already invested $8 billion, not even included in that $38 billion, and it just keeps on going. They are completely 100% all in to success in the Middle East region for esports and gaming. But some of the evolution of that momentum came from Chinese games. So in 2009, there was one called Conquer. It was super popular. It's still growing. In 2015, Revenge of Sultans was #1 in several of those countries. There have been other games, along the mix as well, but and then PUBG Mobile is by far and away the biggest success in the Middle East, and PUBG on PC is also a huge success in the Middle East. Some of you might have even seen recently there was an interview by Bret Baier on Fox of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. It was a 2-part thing. It was his first interview in English ever, and even in that interview, they talked about the importance of the games industry to Saudi Arabia, games and esports. And that just should show you that it's not in my imagination. This is something they're completely devoted to be doing. And here we have some kind of history shots of some Chinese investment in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and vice versa. There's a lot of political back and forth. And I want to say that the success of those Chinese games in the Middle East has been primarily because of the level of investment by the Chinese companies to really study and learn their audience and then apply the appropriate level of localization so that the games are localized and the gamers feel welcome to play. Arabic is a super tricky language because it's right to left. And there aren't a lot of games coded around the world with the text being right to left. And it's also a strange character set for a lot of the developers from around the world. So while Arabic is a huge language globally, it's not a huge language for game development quite yet. And there is a lot of software that's missing in the world to have success there. And so to really localize properly, it takes a lot of time and effort, know your audience, and investment. And I think the Chinese companies had done that with those games that I showed on the previous slide. There might be what people are terming in this industry an esports winter happening in Western markets where esports had been like really hot and now it's cooled down a lot. The investment has gone down, the advertisement, the sponsorships, teams are falling apart, all kinds of stuff is happening. I don't really understand that because as I study the Asian markets in the Middle East all the time, it is summer all the time in esports in Asia. It is hot and getting hotter, and it is the #1 driver of success of games. It's not only that playing them in an esports tournament, which drives a lot of viewers and fans and so forth, but it's also the game mechanics that are involved with esports and the social posting of someone's victory or just the idea of competition. We did a segmentation analysis on gamers in Asia several years ago, and what we determined from our segmentation analysis, which was it was a motivation-based segmentation analysis, and some of you might have taken, statistics and other kinds of computational studies here that you would know what a motivational-based segmentation analysis is. If you don't, you can look that up after, and it's something really interesting. But what we found is that the gamers are motivated by what I call the 4 C's: competition, community, completion, and challenge. Those 4 C's are universal across the Asian gamers. They could like different games, they could like different gameplay, they could have different languages and so forth, but really those are the motivating qualities of the Asian gamers if we were to completely generalize. And it just so happens that the 4 C's also map perfectly to esports. So it is no surprise to my analysts and myself that esports is popular and going nowhere down, only up in Asia, because it's what the gamers want to do. So this is how things are progressing. And Chinese gamers spend 2.6 hours a week watching esports, not even playing. That's a lot of time to just watch someone else play, right? And China is 64.8% of the Asian esports market, which is and it's in China, $473 million. That is excluding the revenue from the games played in esports. So everything else related to esports, but not the games. And then we already talked a little bit about the Hangzhou 2022 games, which are going on in 2023 due to all sorts of delays. And yes, there were 5 million fans that applied for tickets for 5,000 seat venue. And then Chinese, by the time we wrote this presentation, they had won 1 gold. And so we'll see, I think the grand tally is already done. And in case you don't believe me about how much Chinese gamers love esports, you could take a look at this picture, which was from 2021, when a Chinese team called Edward Gaming won the League of Legends Worlds in China. This is 2021. Do you remember that there was a pandemic? Like half of us were not even allowed to go outside, right? My kids were not even allowed to play outdoor sports. And these people are crowding into, this is a courtyard in a building. They were hanging out on all the balconies. Every street was going crazy because the fandom is a level that we can't even appreciate. It's like bigger than the Super Bowl. It's bigger than everything else. And so this is why I think that we were going to have a continuation of, a spillover of the success of esports. And my last comment is going to be something else about spillover, which is that the technology used in game development and in game design is spilling over into other areas of industry and the economy, including healthcare. Lots of non-game related areas of the world are using game technology. So games are not only bringing entertainment to the level that it's bigger than TV, movies, and music combined globally, but also the technology to develop all those games is spilling over into other areas. And as I mentioned earlier, I think AI is going to be a big part of it, and it'll be fun to watch. So I see clear skies ahead, a little bit of cloudy bumps, maybe with things like cryptocurrency in China and some of the regulatory stuff. But we'll just see where it goes. And I'm sure if I get invited back in a few more years, I'll have some new information to present. And I thank you all for listening.